What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Salute to all of the new subscribers, and thank you all so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you guys hype the video, man. It helps me stay in the algorithm. So this topic for today, I'm sure brought you here, and you saw the topic and you said, wow, the international influence of Black American music. Yeah, that's what we're talking about today, man. As you guys can see in the thumbnail, I got icons, right? And I made specifically to choose these specific American Black musicians who have made a huge influence in not only what we consider modern day pop music, but R&B, soul, blues, rock and roll. These are some of the pillars, and I wanted to speak on that because, as you guys just saw, the new Michael Jackson biopic just dropped, and I think for a lot of people, this was one of the more, influential figures in our times. And I mean, I think easily this has probably been one of the most anticipated biopics that we've seen in the last, 20 to 30 years. And there's definitely been different renditions, but this one is going to be the first that was actually directed. And his, nephew, Jafar Jackson, was the lead actor on this one. And I think it definitely shows to what the Jackson family wanted to make sure that this stayed in the family, and they had a huge influence on what the story would tell. And I think they did it justice by choosing Jafar to be a part of this, and he did a great job. It's getting highly reviewed. And so I just wanted to talk about kind of just the overall international influence. I mean, because now, as you see, more and more people are starting to talk about Michael Jackson's legacy and the fact that he was one of one. There will never be another Michael Jackson. And it's been a very, very real conversation to have, because we can look back now and really, really look at the artistry and say, this was one of the greatest to ever do this. And there will never be somebody who could ever emulate what he was able to accomplish, because we're just in different times right now. And I think for the overall influence, it was something from a fan perspective, somebody who is worked in the industry, somebody who sees it from that perspective. It made me want to just speak on not only just Michael Jackson, but the entire construct of the people who have been the most influential, and they were Black American. So you guys know we always got to bring the receipts. And so the 2026 biopic Michael has become a massive global hit, grossing approximately 577 million worldwide in just over 3 weeks, guys. And it is the second highest grossing music biopic of all time, and has set records as the highest grossing music biopic at the domestic box office, with over 240 million according to the data as of May 11th, 2026. All right, guys. So like I told you, it's a very interesting perspective sometimes when you think about Michael still breaking records in 2026, right? He's still able to be a total gross of $577 million, and that's in 2026, okay? 240 million domestic, with an international pool of 336 million. So this is what I always talk about when I always say that Black American relevance is something that cannot be equated just in dollars, because not only does this show that we as a collective, we as a creative group are very, very, very lucrative. Okay. Michael Jackson, even from resting in peace right now, is still the highest grossing biopic to ever exist in the history of music. Is just absolutely insane to think about, but it just proves the point that when we think about the international influence of Black American music, Michael Jackson, being a Black American from Gary, Indiana, all right, is one of those pillars who has literally shattered every single metric that they could ever create. You know what I'm saying? And this is all based on his amazing talent and the people that influence him. And we're going to talk about that. So we all know that the Godfather of Soul, James Brown, was a pioneer and also one of Michael Jackson's biggest influences. He references it in the movie, he represents it in many of interviews, and also, you know, him having just such a close relationship with James Brown once he was able to get on. And I think when you think about when it comes to influences, and also, like I mentioned, international influence, someone that is massive, you know, who can touch not only just a audience right here in the US, but was also reaching audiences overseas. James Brown was one of the first to do that. He was a pioneer musician with massive accolades spanning over 6 decades, including being one of the first inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1996, and then he won 3 Grammy Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1992, and was a 2003 recipient in the Kennedy Honors Center. So we're talking about, you know, one of the greatest to ever do it, someone who was so influential, who had many of accolades, who literally was one of the first to bring a sound that had never been, you know, ever heard before. You know, him being the Godfather of Soul couldn't be more fitting. You know, someone who was just such an influence in the Black community, who was someone who was speaking out and using his music not only to reach the masses, but also to speak out for his people. You know what I'm saying? Being such an icon in our community, and one of the first, like I mentioned, to reach the heights that no other single artist had ever reached. You know, this guy's riding private jets in the 70s, y'all. You know what I'm saying? One of the highest grossing to ever do it. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, when Papa's Got a Brand New Bag was out, you know, it's just different. You know, a different type of time. You know what I'm saying? Living in America, you know, one of the best to ever do it. You know what I'm saying? And I think when you looked at Michael Jackson's influence, some of his dance patterns, a lot of what he picked up, he got that from James Brown. I think Michael Jackson making the decision to essentially link up with Quincy Jones really did make a huge shift in not only what he wanted to do as an artist, but in the industry, where it showed that an artist can be able to mold and create his own sound, and as well linking up with some of the heavy hitters in his industry to be able to create something unique like Michael Jackson did. And I think he created a formula that not only did things for himself successfully, but it also made shockwaves in the industry. And, you know, coming back from when he was, you know, underneath that Berry Gordy structure, where Berry Gordy took Michael under his wing and showed him more so what was going on behind the business end of how the music industry is ran and how you can create records and produce records. I think both of those influences from Michael really did take him to, I think, a height that, like I mentioned, not many other artists will be able to ever reach, because Michael came from such a traditional background, being in the Jackson 5 and being able to have that very early experience took him new heights that I don't think any artist, current or, you know, future, will be able to touch. You know, Michael was just such a unique individual. You know, and I think for as a male artist, he's one of the greatest we've ever seen, but I think we got one for the female artist who's definitely reached her heights as well. I think there's no better time to witness and to pay our respects to the Queen, Whitney Houston, who is arguably one of the greatest singers of all time. And she's also a Black American icon, one of the greatest singers to ever live, guys. I mean, the accomplishments speak for themselves. You know what I'm saying? Over 200 million records sold worldwide, okay? Billboard number ones. She's won over 6 Grammys. You know what I'm saying? Has over 400 total awards. Okay, when we're talking about Black excellence, we're talking about the most influential singers to ever exist. These are the type of people that we talk about. You know what I'm saying? I think sometimes when we look at the grand scale of where the music industry now is, and, you know, the downturn and what has changed about the industry, I think it always comes back to the voice. And Whitney Houston is one of the greatest voices that we have ever heard. Okay, she comes from a very traditional background. You know, everybody knows her story about, you know, coming up from the church and her traditional family who came from musicians who were singers. Okay, so her pedigree is, you know, not even to be spoken on. You know what I mean? But the fact of the matter is, her being able to gross as much she has, you know what I'm saying, still holding the record for #1 records. Come on, guys, you know what I'm saying? She has 7 consecutive #1 Billboard 100s. Okay, this is something that, you know, like I mentioned, like when we're talking about international influence, stuff that people cannot equate just in dollars, Whitney Houston personifies that. Okay, just a voice that was transcendent, not only through, you know, our United States airwaves, but worldwide airwaves. Okay, she also holds the record for the best-selling soundtrack for The Bodyguard. Okay, you guys already know that was an international hit. Okay, that movie did numbers as well with Kevin Costner. We already know what it is. Okay, she's also the first Black artist to score 3, count them, 3 RIAA Diamond certified albums. Okay, the first. All right, nobody has done it. Nobody has done it since. We're talking about one of the greatest to ever do it, The Voice, right? And I think when we talk about what the influence of foundational Black American musicians, the worldwide influence cannot be equated. Just because, like I mentioned, when it comes to our influence worldwide, nobody is able to be as creative as us. Nobody is be able to create the products that we have, the understanding, the depth. Okay, some things just cannot be explained. And this is why we always talk about, when we do feel like the chosen people, it's always proven through the works. And when you think about somebody like Whitney Houston, that is a God-given voice, okay? She can never be replicated, and that's what, I mean, let's keep it real. That's what the game is missing, and we know that. That's why the music just sounded different back then. It felt different because a lot of these people, these icons that we're speaking on right now, that sound cannot be recreated. And that's why I always make it clear that for all of us, as foundational Black Americans, we need to make sure that we still uphold our icons and don't let anybody try to degrade them. You know, growing up in a household where we listened to a lot of Stevie Wonder, I never really understood how influential it was until I started to travel, right? And I started to go different countries, and I would hear so many of his songs in so many different cafes and so many different parties I would go to, and people's homes I was in, and I would just being in awe and understanding that, wow, like all the way over here in Europe, or all the way over here in Japan or in Asia, you know what I mean? I'm over here and I'm listening to Stevie Wonder, and they know every single word, you know what I mean? I'm listening to the Isley Brothers, and they can also relate to those type of songs, and so we can vibe. And it's very interesting because, like I mentioned, these are all Black American musicians who have been super influential and have touched a lot of different lives. And it goes without mention, but there's a guy like Jimi Hendrix who a lot of people, you know, uphold as the greatest guitarist of all time, right? Not really understanding that the Isley Brothers were actually his influence, and how he actually used to be on tour with them back in the day, and how a lot of what he got was from the Isley Brothers. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story, you know, just about brotherhood, and how, you know, a lot of people, specifically from the Black American community, specifically musicians, had such a tight-knit group, where at these times where they didn't have a lot of places to perform, and a lot of these places were really tight-knit circles, they all banded together as brothers to support one another and to help each other's careers. And as you could see, Jimi Hendrix becoming an international icon because he did go over to the UK and get a lot of his career kick-started over there, got really big, came back to America, and was able to, like I said, reach iconic status. And it's a beautiful thing because these people we can reference over and over and over again. And it's very, very, you know, rich history that I think a lot of us need to make sure that we continue to address and continue to bring to the forefront, because this is history that we have been a part of as a community. And it honestly gets no more iconic than the late great Prince, okay? We're talking about 7-time Grammy Award winner, okay? You know what I'm saying? Just one of the best to ever do it. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee. You know, I would love to play a lot of the videos and all that stuff, but, you know, those copyright, you know, issues go over here. But we're talking about one of the best to ever do it. Obviously, you know, a lot of people talked about him and Michael's rivalry, and, you know, them being, you know, kind of the yin to the yang of each other's eras. But I think, you know, they uniquely had their own lanes, in my opinion. You know what I mean? I think that Prince was, you know, his own unique artist who had his own lane and did his own thing. And I think Michael Jackson, he had his own lane and he did his own thing. Obviously, I think, you know, there may have been, you know, a friendly rivalry there just based on accomplishments. But I mean, we're talking about two Hall of Famers right now, you know, two goats, you know what I mean? Who's the goat to the goat? You know, it's just one of those type of situations, you know, where you have two people who are, you know, basically mirrors of each other in the alternate universe. Reality, I mean, you got to think about it. These are two young guys, and at this time, you know, the career and the crown, obviously with the white establishment, they're going to put these two brothers against each other. But I think, you know, for what we got to experience was amazing music, iconic moments, and I think it really raised their profile to, like I said, an international recognition, okay? And we were so lucky to be able to, you know, experience this as, you know, people who were, you know, patrons of music, who love music, who listen to music, and being able to live our lives to it, you know what I mean? Because music is a soundtrack of our lives. And so obviously when you look at the international influence of Black American musicians, these are all the examples that, you know, I could always continue to bring. So in conclusion, when we're talking about the greatest musicians of all time, and we're talking about the icons of the Black American community, these people that I chose to put in this thumbnail truly do represent that. And I think right now we're having a conversation about the greatest musicians of all time and Michael Jackson and his influence not only in the United States but worldwide. And I feel like you cannot have those conversations without making sure that we continue to acknowledge and make sure that this conversation continues to stay where we want it to stay as foundational Black Americans. We're always the ones who have to stand on business about our history and our lineage and the things that we've accomplished, the people that have come before us who have paved the way for so many others. And these people right here are some of the most iconic to ever grace this industry, whether it be music, entertainment. These people have been some of the greatest to ever do it. And I thought it was important for me to do this video because I built my channel around Black American history, music, the influence of our artists. And I think as a Black artist and someone who is a proponent of Black art, it's important for me to do these type of videos to make sure that we continue to acknowledge and show the history of who we are and what we've done as artists. Because art is one of the most important things on this earth. And if we continue to cultivate that part of who we are, because that is something that is especially unique about Black American culture, is the fact that we are the greatest artists in the world. And I think in order for us to continue to raise the bar and continue to change the narrative and continue to make history, we must always dig deep, represent the history, and pay respects to the ancestors. Salute to everybody out there. Make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you hype the video. It helps me stay in the algorithm. I truly appreciate everybody who comes by, leaves likes, leave comments. You guys truly do keep me inspired to keep making these videos. Much love and respect. Peace.